Coming to us from the Great White North of Toronto, Canada, we got Magnastar. Presenting for Magnastar is Jacqueline Good. Give her a round of applause.
Of building amazing space spectrum simulation technology, you can find me sailing and training for space. Hello, my name is Jacqueline Good. I'm the founder and CEO of Magnastar. I'm here with Demo Danny. We are thrilled to be presenting Magnastar and 24/7X. 24/7X is spectrum simulation and coordination infrastructure, bringing relief to the space sector. Next slide. Welcome to space. Everything that we do in terms of financial verification, GPS navigation, financial services, as well as telecommunication and Earth observation, relies on space technology. Radio frequency waves moving between Earth and space consistently for service. As we move from 8,000 satellites to over 100,000 satellites in space, the overall noise level between Earth and space is set to dramatically increase, causing interference and outages of the services we depend on. The current process set in place for obtaining spectrum, coordinating amongst other operators, and protecting your spectrum rights is an intensely manual, costly, and timely process that all operators and regulators are struggling through. Magnastar is taking on this challenge, especially as, if we are unable to have dependable space technology, it puts the entire sector in jeopardy. Space technology, and that's what we're bringing forward. We are here to ease the complexity of space spectrum. We simulate at scale when multiple satellites will be directly in a collinear vector and interfering with one another. We predict this both in the short term as well as in the long term, over a 2-year period of time. What is the likelihood of multiple satellites or constellations interfering with one another, and does it go beyond the thresholds of the regulators that are put in place? We uniquely embed that simulation technology into coordination infrastructure. One of the satellite operators we are working with in building out this technology, they received an allocation of spectrum from the International Telecommunications Union, and they then received 70 letters from different operators saying they were going to interfere. They then had to go to each one of these different operators and prove to each one of them why they would not interfere with them, using simulation technology that takes a week to set up a given simulation, over 24 hours to get a result, and writing letters back and forth, having their engineers and PhDs writing letters in order to go through the coordination process. We have automated portions of this process to expedite how satellite operators work together, and then monitor post-coordination to ensure compliance of these agreements. In doing so, we are protecting satellite operators' most valuable asset, which is their spectrum rights. Next slide. You can think of us as your one-stop shop for all spectrum management. We build in an operator safety net so that any new filings coming out of the International Telecommunications Union are run through our simulation technology and flagged to the operator on which ones to pay unique attention to and to go through the coordination process with. We then simulate at scale the spectrum interference, the interference that will occur, and clear communication pathways between Earth and space, as well as between operator-operator relationships and operator-to-regulator. Let's jump into the demo. You can see here as we open up the 24/7X platform, I have notifications. These notifications include all the new filings that have recently been released, new allocations of spectrum. What is spectrum? What does the market look like today? Which ones should I be paying attention to as an operator and going through coordination agreements with? Which new filings, or have there been modifications on filings that I already have coordination agreements with? And is there new data that has been communicated back and forth between me and another operator that I'm currently coordinating with? If we run into actually running a simulation, which we're going to go through today, you can see the portal of all the different agreements we're currently working through. This would be the one-stop shop for all operators to see their coordination agreements they're working through, their simulations, everything logged, all correspondence back and forth logged accordingly for ease of reference and proof that you are working through those coordination agreements. We go through and we run a specific simulation. This will mean that in the back end, the system is actually running how multiple satellites will be orbiting Earth at a regular cadence and how often their likelihood is to interfere with each other, and if it goes beyond any of the thresholds based on calculations approved by the International Telecommunications Union. We click in and we can see one of them as actually a fail. This is the equivalent power flux density equation. It is a fail, meaning that in real time, if this was to occur, the operator would have received an outage or an interference event that would have had a service issue. In this instance, we can work directly with the operator in this operator-operator sandbox to request more information to de-escalate this risk. If it is a pass, as in the thresholds are not exceeded, we can go ahead and complete that coordination agreement and notify the regulator that it has been completed, closing the circle. This is immensely critical, again, as this is what we depend on for all the services that we rely on here on Earth, is clear passive communication, and that's what Magnastar is bringing to the table. Let's jump back into the presentation. Next slide. We are building this into a semi-autonomous enterprise signal system. Next slide. We have achieved alignment with 11 geostationary operators, 14 non-geostationary operators, 8 government organizations across military, regulators, and international bodies who have signed letters of intent, prepaid to be a part of our early adopter program, and we have won a military contract. Next slide. They see this being valuable both as an internal and external solution because we're building the coordinations directly in, and we're the first company to conduct that work, both for on-demand as well as real-time long-term simulations, and because we're planning on building this in to a spectrum exchange. The only way that we can create a secondary market for spectrum and release spectrum back into the ecosystem is by ensuring that spectrum, as it's being subleased, will not interfere with others and that the coordination agreements are being completed, and that's why we're uniquely positioned at a company to bring this to fruition. We're also within their community. I am a delegate of the International Telecommunications Union. I am a part of the United Nations, bringing all new regulations forward for satellite communications. Next slide.
That's where we're going to have to end it. I'm so sorry we're
Thank you
out
so
of
much.
time. Give her a round of applause. Let's start with Mar.
Oh, there you go. You're giving me the floor. Okay, it seems like you're building this exchange. So there's some regulators and some operators. The regulator is an international body, I assume. What does it take for you to get to work with this international body and then, you becoming the standard?
Absolutely. So the international body is the International Telecommunications Union, and then all the administrations. So each country has their own administration, which does the spectrum allocations as well, and they all tie up to the International Telecommunications Union. We are members of the International Telecommunications Union as Canadian delegates. So we are already a part of the community that builds all rules and regulations and are moving forward to this technology being the new standard, which is seen as needed by all the 11 geostationary operators, 14 non-geostationary operators, and 8 government organizations, including multiple of the regulators and international body, that are aligned with our objectives towards making this the new standard.
If you put a timeline on it, like at what point, if you want to request spectrum, you have to use Magnastar's software or forms or whatever, or simulations. Do you have a sense? Is it a year, 10 years? I have no idea how slow these people are or how fast they are.
Yes, so I think that we see it specifically as we will be achieving that benchmark within the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay, thanks.
Dana?
Yeah, I'm just curious. So do they, without you, what happens? Because I actually started in the cellular industry 100 years ago, so we had roaming agreements across the carriers, and companies sort of work together. Different issues because you didn't have satellites. You were dealing with fixed assets, but the spectrum issue was a meaningful one. And so I guess I'm just trying to understand, does it have to be an independent body? Does it have,
Yeah, so it's great that you come from the terrestrial market. In terms of the difference, one of the differences between the terrestrial and the space market is the dynamics of space. Typically today, in order to defuse interference issues on the terrestrial market, they'll send physical trucks to locations to sense for spectrum. That's much harder to do in the space ecosystem, which is why we are leveraging a data solution to predict when interference will occur. And at the same point, we actually are seeing quite a bit of traction with the operators we're working with today that they would like us to involve more terrestrial markets, specifically because they're seeing more interference potentially between the space and terrestrial ecosystem. The way that I see ourselves playing into that is that we are building the technology that enables all operators and regulators to assess how, as we go from 8,000 satellites to 100,000 satellites, how these constellations will coexist and affect one another. We are building the enablement tools to enable every single satellite operator and regulator to perform the advanced calculations, because currently in the process today, it's them manually going through the new filings, running the simulations themselves in one solution, producing reports in another solution, going back and forth between operators in another solution with emails and letters back and forth one another. And monitoring post-coordination is a pretty big question mark. So we look at that entire process and how we can build in semi-autonomous systems into that to expedite the process and ease it, because currently today it would take months to a year, even 2 years, to go through a given coordination agreement, and we'd like to get that into a much faster expedited rate so that operators can focus on operating their satellites.
But today, it's not a requirement that they use a third party. I mean, you would like it to be, I assume.
Yeah, so we are looking for a regulatory moat within the solution. Operators can use this technology today. Most operators we've been working with would like to start using it whether the regulatory regime are recommending it or not, specifically because we have so much advancements in the simulation speed and because they can keep a consistent cadence of all their coordination agreements that they're working through and applying this in real time because it directly ties to their revenue. If you have outages in communications, it directly ties into their service license agreements, and that hits the revenue directly.
Moon?
Could you talk about your first few customers? How long did it take to sell to them? What does an average deal look like?
Yeah, so in terms of our first few customers, we are a 20-month-year-old company. We'll hit our 2-year mark in December. So we have already, we have one military customer. We obtained that military contract 4 months ago, so within our first year and a quarter. And then we received our second, we actually just opened our early adopter program last week. We've had 4 satellite operators sign on already to become early adopters starting in February of next year. And we have early beta testers who are testing the technology today.
Charles?
Related to that, I don't know much about the satellite industry. Can you tell me what's the balance between government and commercial? How concentrated is it in terms of the number of operators? I'm just trying to get my arms around what the customer environment looks like.
Yes, so there are currently 300 that we can attest to, 300 active satellite operators. In terms of percentage-wise, from commercial to government, it's actually massively increasing on the commercial side. There are many more commercial operators. So we have 300 active satellite operators, 1,500 new space satellite operators who are coming into fruition. This is a massively growing sector. We also have 183 administrations who are allocating spectrum on a regular basis. And then also we are bridging into the terrestrial market as well. In terms of the average deal side, I think that was also a question. We're unable to say that on stage today, but we do have 3 different models of how we're pricing this. One is a very low barrier to entry model where we charge per simulations. We can get every single startup, every single university, every single administration on the platform. The second one is an enterprise edition where we have a fixed cost on a yearly basis, which is in skew what they're used to paying today. They're used to paying today about $70,000 to $100,000 per user. So we are in skew with that. And then the third is actually taking a portion of the spectrum exchange within the platform.
We'll go to Mara and then Matthew.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. One is I know there's a lot of international satellites as well. Are you able to sell, is it US, or are you able to sell to China, Russia? Do they need to be in the platform for you to know whether folks are going to be aligned and there's going to be interference? Do you need everybody data to be able to run a simulation that is accurate?
So we can run the simulations today using the telemetry information. The telemetry is where the satellites are at a given time and where they're likely to be within 2 days. We also have the spectrum filings because many of those filings actually are public of which bands they have the capacity to use, so we can predict interference in that capacity. We are a Canadian company, so we are outside of specific regulations that are governing U.S. defense. So that's how we actually can sell to a global market quite sufficiently. We are working with operators in the United States, operators in Canada, in Europe, and as well we're onboarding folks in Asia as well. That is how we're approaching the market today.
And in terms of pricing, my understanding is that it's very top-heavy. So the top 50 operators have 10 or more satellites, and then there's a long tail of operators. Do you charge per satellite, or do you charge, you said per user as your second model. Is user operator or satellite? What is user?
So user is per user, so per person at the desk using the technology. We considered a per satellite pricing model. Other folks have considered that as well. I find that it disincentivizes the larger players from entering the platform, and we want to make sure that we get as many operators as possible, especially because those larger players tend to have more spectrum. And they're the ones that are very encouraging of us building a spectrum exchange because they'd like to sublease portions of that spectrum to other markets. There's been $250 billion spent on spectrum allocation in the United States alone, and that's the market we're going after to make that more feasible for everyone to get access to.
I think my last question is, when can you sell to SpaceX? I think they're like 20% of the market.
Quickly, please. It was a real question.
That is a real question, right? Can we sell to SpaceX? SpaceX is also a member of the International Telecommunications
Do they
Union.
do it themselves? I mean, I'm curious, they have the most satellites of anybody out there, right?
Yes,
do
they
they
do have the most
deal with this
satellites.
themselves, or can you sell to them?
We can sell to them.
Okay.
We'll leave it there. Thank you so much. Give a round of applause.